I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking you for the role you played in the speaker controversy, because you brought urgency to the television screen and underscored that there were major things at stake. So thank you. I want to begin by asking you to do a look back. A friend of mine named Brian Ferguson, and you may know Brian from the teams. I don't know if you ever deployed together, but may know Brian. He gave a speech once where he talked about how the SEALs would do something called a hot wash after a mission, where in reverse order of seniority, they would review what had happened, what went right, what went wrong, ending with the commander of the mission. So in congressional terms, would you do a hot wash for us as to what screwed up there? Because if the mission is getting to yes and getting a majority, that was not the way to do it the next time.
Well, how much time do you have?
We got lots of time.
It's a great question. I mean, I'll just give you my assessment of what happened. I mean, there's this. I think there's certain members that legitimately just had a personal dislike for McCarthy. And that's okay. You're allowed to have that, but what I would have liked to have seen, if this movement was going to happen, what I would have liked to have seen is simply someone else running against him. I mean, in a real way, not just throwing the name in the hat at the last minute, or nominating a different member of Congress, or even a non-member of Congress every time they nominated someone. But I mean, really run against them, for a year or say, like go around, raise money, ask for votes, those kind of things. That would have been a different tone, I think. But that's not what happened at all. And they're just, I think one of the reasons there became so much animosity throughout that week was because it didn't seem like there was a plan. It didn't seem like there was an alternative reality that they wanted to live in. There's all this talk about the rules package, and you see all these memes going out from a lot of the kind of the right wing Twitter world saying you got to thank the 20 Patriots for this historic rules package. Well, no, you don't. That's a false narrative. Like I do honestly believe we can move forward and that we can all be friends now, and it is good to kind of have these fights out. But I will not let this narrative stand that they won this rules package. That's a lie. The rules package was already agreed to. Nothing changed from the first vote to the 17th vote or whatever we took. Nothing changed. It's also worth noting that we could have just, if it was really about negotiating these rules, we easily just could have adjourned on the first day, gone behind closed doors until we hashed it out. We didn't have to do this in public. Didn't have to have all these ridiculous nominating speeches. Didn't have to nominate different members of Congress or Donald Trump like every single time. It was obvious that they wanted a show. And it was really frustrating. I don't only say that. I'm not trying to create more fights here. I just don't want the false narrative to become reality. That's all. That's the reason. I also want to explain to people why the anger got so heated. It wasn't like the 200 who were voting for McCarthy were just McCarthy's best friends and were really mad if they were saying mean things about him. That's really not what it was. It was that we didn't know what the other side wanted. And when we would ask them, we would personally ask many members, and they wouldn't be able to tell us. There was a really defining moment before we even took the first vote where in front of everyone, in front of the conference, McCarthy asked one of the leaders of this group, what else can we give you? Like, what else do you guys want to get the yes? And he couldn't answer it. And that was a really bad moment for the conference, because then it really seemed like we would never get that answer.
Now,
there was some other kind of intent here.
I've got to ask, because we are going to run soon into the debt limit crisis followed by the funding crisis. There are two inflection points ahead. One will come in June, one will come in September. In June, the debt limit's got to go up. I don't know what the Republicans are going to ask in exchange. In 2011, they got sequestration, which were terrible for Department of Defense. Chip Roy and I talked about that at length. Chip's position as of last week is a rollback to 2022 spending, or as an alternative, a rollback to FY19 and non-defense discretionary spending. I misstated that in the Washington Post article I wrote, and I regret that. I want to get people right. But mostly I want to know, what process does Dan Crenshaw think the Republicans ought to follow to get a list of demands in exchange for a debt limit hike, which is inevitable, so that they don't lose the showdown with the Democrats via the media.
Yeah, and I don't know what the map looks like. I do agree with most Republicans that there should be some kind of concessions in place if you're going to raise the debt. It is in and of itself a national security crisis to have a runaway debt, and we spent a lot of money in the last few years. Our mandatory spending is going to drive our country into a pretty unsustainable debt trajectory. So getting some kind of hold on that, if we're going to raise the debt limit, is not an absurd request to make. How that looks, I'm not sure yet. Right? It's a few months away. We have to get something, and we just have to be careful about what we ask for. I mean, you can obviously ask for too much, and there's going to be differences of opinion on what's possible and what's not. And there's a certain wing of the party who always thinks that we could have done better. Who always thinks that we could die on every single hill and do better. And there's others who say that's just completely unrealistic. And that perception of reality is really what the fight is about, right? It's really not about who's more conservative or less conservative. It's really about who interprets reality differently, and who interprets the political reality differently than others. And we're going to have to just find that sweet spot and make sure that we don't actually default on our debt, while also making sure that we put our debt on a sustainable trajectory.
And the political reality, if the mission set is to get a win in the course of raising the credit card limit again, and it's gone from $6 trillion at the end of the Clinton presidency to $31 trillion in the middle of the Biden presidency. That's wild. People ought to step back and say, what? And that we went from $6 trillion when George W. Bush went into office, and we're at $31 trillion now. And the big three events are 9/11, 2008, and COVID. That's the explanation, bipartisan spending. But now we have to do something. But what we get out of that, the Republicans will get crushed, and they will interfere with the 2024 presidential campaign and the debates among Republicans that will begin in July if they don't get to a coherent set of asks. And do you think that last week foreshadows the next couple of months? Because if it does, it's a nightmare for Republicans.
I would say it was probably good to get a lot of those demons out early. I'm not trying to just find some ridiculous silver lining to all of this, but I would have rather gotten those demons out early than do it when you've got a debt crisis on your hands. And so I know McCarthy said that in public a few times, and people say, "Oh no, you're just trying to paint this pig with lipstick." But I actually do agree with him. You learn a lot about your colleagues. It's good to yell at each other sometimes and then apologize afterwards. There's actually a lot of growth that comes with that, and a little bit more trust that occurs there. So, look, there are going to be differences. This is going to be difficult times with the budget and the debt ceiling. Those are going to be difficult times, but I do think we'll get through them. I'm a little bit more optimistic than most.
Now, Congressman, what I'm urging, I had Chairman Gallagher on earlier, and Mike agrees. I think you agree. We cannot reduce defense spending a dime. It actually needs an increase, a fairly significant increase year over year over the 2023 continuing resolution, because we have a South China Sea problem, we have a resupply problem, we've got a Columbia-class nuclear submarine problem. Do you think the vast majority of Republicans agree that defense spending cannot go down?
I do. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the disagreements when it comes to national defense are over hot topics like Ukraine and such. And look, there's also massive agreement that we need the Defense Department to do a lot more with the dollars that we give them. I mean, and this is in the armed services lane. I'm not even on that committee, but everybody who's even come in contact with the military knows how much wasteful spending goes on. It's not this fraudulent wasteful spending. It's just a poor bureaucratic procedure in how they do contracting and how they do acquisitions. And so you have to do both, right? You have to make sure that we're investing the right dollars in the right places so that we can compete with China in the long run. You do have to rebuild our industrial complex to actually meet those demands. Like, there's this myth out there that we always just want to increase spending and have these endless wars to support the military industrial complex and our donors. You need to hear that from, say, Tucker Carlson and such. The problem is exactly the opposite. The problem, and we're seeing it now as we try to deliver weapons to Taiwan, deliver weapons to Ukraine, is that we don't even really have a military industrial complex the way we thought we did. That's the real problem. There's a lot of complicated reasons for that, but yes, I think most Republicans generally understand this idea. There's disputes on exactly what we do with it, but I think we'll as Republicans as a whole, we will be fighting to at least maintain defense spending or increase it.
Now, on that point, I think the Chief of Naval Operations said last week, even if the Congress wanted us to build more submarines this year, we couldn't. We can build 1.2 submarines a year. That's a bad situation because we're never going to help AUKUS stand up and get the Australians nuclear subs if we can't build our own. Congressman Crenshaw, which committees are you on? Did you end up on the Select Committee on China or on the Weaponization Committee or on HASS? Where are you?
Well, I'm on Energy and Commerce. That's been my committee. So I deal with energy issues and healthcare issues. That's I'm from Houston, after all. When it comes to national security issues, I try to influence from the outside.
Have you put a bid in for the China Committee?
I haven't, as much as I like hanging out with our mutual friend Mike Gallagher, but maybe I will. We haven't gotten to that point yet as replacing members on different committees.
Yeah, I want serious people on that. There are only going to be 9 Republicans. I'm hoping the Democrats come up with 7 serious people because I'm going to be talking with Mike Pompeo about his new book, Briefly, Never Give an Inch. And it's all about China, basically. It's not all about China, but a lot of it is about China. And that challenge is out there. And how significant, Dan Crenshaw, do you think that challenge is? I keep saying it's 1938, it's 1938, it's 1938. People think I'm nuts, but I think it's 1938. What do you think?
Well, it's different but similar. Yeah, I mean it's a longer term challenge that I do think there's challenges the Chinese are going to face that are going to benefit us. I think it's different in 1938 only in the sense that 1938 seemed to be only about military warfare. This kind of warfare is quite different. It's information warfare, it's economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, and of course potentially military warfare. It's our primary adversary for sure. It's our primary concern. That's why we've actually stood up this committee, and it was a bipartisan vote. Very few people voted against standing up this select committee. So there's a lot of good news to be had here. I think there's an understanding that the Chinese have hoodwinked us for years. Right? There's this belief that they were going to grow up into this wonderful democracy and contribute to the world economic health and all of that. It's all just nonsense. And they have a very strange and historic belief that the U.S. has been trying to trick them for decades. And it's time we understood that. And you're seeing, I think, a decoupling on the private sector in a large way. Without Congress doing anything, the private sector has been diversifying their supply chains and making sure that they're not solely reliant on China. There's a lot of good news to be had here. I've had many of the departments, many of the different branches of the Department of Defense come in and tell us, like, what exactly are you doing to plan for this? What kind of weapon systems? How are you restructuring your force? And I tend to like what I hear. It also tends to be obvious that they're about 5 to 10 years behind. We definitely started thinking about this a little too late, but they're definitely thinking about it. And from my tactical perspective, they're thinking about it in the correct ways. But it just reiterates this point. You can't cut spending now. You can't cut those investments now. You have to let the Chinese know we're serious. We have to arm Taiwan to the teeth with the right kind of weapons that make an invasion of Taiwan an untenable option for the Chinese. It must be so costly that they can't even consider it. Our goal has to be 100% prevention, because you do not want to be in a war across an ocean over Taiwan. You just don't want to be in that situation. Our goal has to be prevention, and we've got to move a lot faster on that front.
So, Dan Crenshaw, you're a Navy guy, and so you're going to have some bias baked into your answer. But I think there has to be, in the context of the switch to the China competition, a lot of budget changes at the Pentagon that de-emphasize big Army and go to the Navy, Space Force, and the Air Force. That's just the map. The map is now mostly water for us, not desert. Do you agree with that, and do you think you're going to get some agreement from your Army friends like Mike Waltz and others who served in the big Army situation?
I mean, I'm sure the Army can find something to spend money on, but I do think there's agreement there for sure. The Pacific really is maritime domain. The Marine Corps plays a huge part in this as well. So yeah, I would agree with that, and the investments in the Space Force are going to be extremely important as well, and investing in future weapon systems that operate in space, that also counter what the Chinese have in space. It's going to be a very important domain.
Now that leads me to the last subject. I believe you have introduced an authorization for the use of military force against the cartels. I know Mike Waltz supports this as well. I hope more Republicans step up and join that. What did you propose, Congressman Crenshaw?
Yeah, no, I definitely think more Republicans will come out and support that. My real hope is that I can get some Democrats to come out and support that. So it's an authorized use of military force. This is the same kind of AUMF that we have against, say, the perpetrators of 9/11. Okay, it authorizes the president to use military force against the I just dropped the plate against a select entity. In this case, we define those entities very specifically as anyone associated with these specific 9 cartels. You're thinking of like the Sinaloa cartels such as those. But we also broaden it slightly to anyone who is facilitating the trafficking of fentanyl. So this is really directed at the fentanyl problem, because what we see here is a war against the American people, where 80,000 people a year are dying of fentanyl overdose. I don't see that as a drug problem. I don't see that as the classic war on drugs. I see this as a poisoning problem, where people are being poisoned by fentanyl. It's coming from this, of course, interlinks with the China problem. The Chinese organized crime syndicates, they give the basic components to the Mexican drug cartels. They reprocess it. They get it across our border. So they're at war with us. I mean, you see reports of Sinaloa cartels just literally within eyeshot of our border, armed to the teeth, kind of in these sort of forward operating bases. They're at war with us, and I think we should recognize it. Now, what I really think, too, is if we had a bipartisan AUMF that passed out of Congress, the president can do whatever he wants with an AUMF. He can just not do anything with it. But you know what it gives him? Leverage. It gives him leverage when we're trying to deal with Mexico on the immigration crisis, on the fentanyl crisis, on all of it. Mexico itself, as a country, can solve a lot of these problems if we simply ask them to. Now, if we ask them to, they won't do it. But if we leverage them, they might do it. And this is what Donald Trump did to get the Remain in Mexico policy. He simply threatened them with tariffs. So they can be leveraged. They can be worked with, but they need to know that we're serious about protecting our own homeland, and that's where the idea of this AUMF comes from.
I want to follow up on that. Governor Youngkin has said on this program last week, they've begun a new program in Virginia, One Pill Can Kill, because the poisoning aspect, as opposed to the drug use aspect, is different. And there was a story in the New York Times about heroin users dying because they're getting fentanyl in their heroin. They know how to normally, they're drug abusers. Yeah. We can work on that, but it's a different problem. It is a poisoning problem. Do Democrats agree with you, Congressman Crenshaw?
They agree with the statement you just made. It's hard to tell how far they will go to actually deal with the problem. Right? Their mind goes a different place. Their mind goes to, well, we got to treat people better. We got all that kind of stuff, and better treatment facilities. And I'm like, no, man, you got to do that, but you got to go to the source of the poison. At the state level, what they've been successful as is reclassifying fentanyl as a poison, so that the penalty for trafficking it is much, much harsher. It's murder at that point. Not just drug trafficking. You're now accused of murder. That's exactly what should be happening. So you have to make sure that we're disincentivizing them and these middlemen drug dealers. But you have to go after the real problem. I mean, these are warlike figures and groups just south of our border. They're probably the most well-armed, most well-equipped, best-financed terrorist organizations in the entire world. And you have to deal with them as such. Enough is enough.
This is, by the way, this is a gap in the American public's perception. They've watched too many Netflix series. They've watched Breaking Bad, and they think it's a group of about 30 people who will put you in the basement and cut off the heads of their local people. They're actually a paramilitary organization that has a command structure. Many of them have trained in Special Forces of Mexico. Do you think that Mexico is a failed state, Dan Crenshaw?
Well, it's right on the verge. It's right on the verge of being a failed narco-terrorist state. I mean, there was literally a war. It's probably still ongoing in the state of Sinaloa right now because the Mexican president finally ordered the arrest of El Chapo's son. And the retaliation was extreme. This was a war. These people are able to fight the Mexican army. So yes, it's like you said. This is a paramilitary force, one of the best in the world, and they can fend off literal attacks from an entire nation-state's army.
So a last question. You've got some support for this AUMF. I know Walt supports it. Other people support it. Do you have any indication that the Mexican government would resist it? Because I assume it would only take place with notice at the last minute. The way we deal with the Pakistanis when you would go in and get an Al-Qaeda or Taliban people, sometimes you tell them, sometimes you don't, but they know our drones are there. Does your AUMF contemplate consultation with the Mexican government?
It would, of course, need to. And how would they react? Well, they would react very unfavorably, as you can imagine. But this is the problem. See, you can do two case studies here, Colombia and Mexico. Now, the Colombians let America in. Right? We had a very good relationship with Colombia over the course of a few decades with Colombia, and we eventually achieved our goals to a massive extent and prevented Colombia from becoming this awful failed state. Look, I have some very close relationships with Colombia. I actually went to high school there because my dad was in the oil business, and we lived down there at the time, at the height of the guerrilla war. There's a pretty massive difference in Colombia between now and 20 years from ago when I lived there. Mexico has often and always resisted American involvement. And to their own detriment, right? They resist our intelligence sharing. They resist doing joint operations. They resist all of it. And because they've done that, they've gone down this path where they've basically just, instead of working with us to fight the cartels, they've basically gone into this policy of appeasement and containment with the cartels. But it's not going to work forever because the cartels like making money, and they're going to continue to try to do things that make them money and power. And we have to say enough is enough. And I think the fentanyl crisis is that time.
I hope you are right. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, again, thanks for the stand you took a couple of weeks ago. Thanks for joining me today. Keep coming back. And I hope you end up on that China committee, even if you're already busy. Congressman, thank you. I want to thank everyone for listening today. I want to thank Adam and Jacob and Dwayne. I remind everyone that you can listen to the Universe and get every minute of every show. You can listen to the Grand Old Pod. My voice is kind of racked, and that's just the it's just the consequences of too much talking, too much teaching, and too much everything. But it'll get back to normal. In the meantime, we push on. Generalissimo is going to post the audio of the Dan Crenshaw. He's going to type the audio of the Dan Crenshaw. We're going to make sure that we're going to make people understand we have ungoverned spaces on the southern border that present a national security threat to the United States. Crenshaw's got his eye on it. Waltz has his eye on it. Gallagher will have his eyes on it. The serious people are focused on serious problems. They all happen to be Republicans.